Happy New Year, Pirate Nation. Tim Best, Pat Madden. Welcome to this first edition of Hoist the Colors for 2025. Wow, I still can't believe we're really here in 2025. But might as well start with talking about the last thing that happened in 2024 for this squad. Playing against Xavier in Cincinnati. Pat, you were in the building for it, and it was another instance of Seton Hall just getting the doors blown off them early, and in a road environment like Cintas, that'll doom you every single time. Tell me what was happening with you know Isaiah Coleman looked good throughout the whole game, and he got him going initially. But once Xavier went on that first big run, I mean, I bet you could probably tell that that was pretty much all she wrote.
Yeah, that was, unfortunately, the first minute of the game was the best minute of the game when they scored the two quick baskets early. I think, Jashir Felton hits a three, makes it 5-0. And then unfortunately, Xavier drops a 16-0 run. They look like just a well-oiled machine. I mean, going into that game, I think they were. I think you were concerned if you were a Seton Hall fan about how good Xavier's offense looked, even though they had lost to Connecticut and Marquette. So then you fast forward to Tuesday afternoon, and they had basically almost all cylinders firing between Conwell. Uh, Conwell was hitting threes. Dante Maddox hit a couple of threes. And of course, the one guy who was basically had done almost nothing the whole season, but decides to have his game of the year on us is Big John Hughley, uh, who neither Aaron Aronay nor Yalden, because uh, Okorafor didn't see the court much again on Tuesday afternoon. Neither did Garway Duel. So I don't know if that tells you something about where Holloway is with those guys in terms of why, in terms of them not playing. Is it an effort thing? Is it that they're not really putting out an effort in practice? Obviously, their games haven't gotten that much better from what we saw at the beginning of the season. So, Hughley has his day off. Hughley has his day against Aaron Aronay and Yalden, and it was I forgot what it was at the half. I think it was like 15. Let me look at the box score. I think
44,
I tried to erase the
40,
memory of the game.
40 yeah, 44-31 at the half.
Oh, okay. And then Xavier took another big run early in the second half, made it a 25-point game. And then at that point, it turns into a glorified scrimmage. Also, didn't help that James Breeding was on the call, and James Breeding was trying to impress everybody about how many times he can spot a touch foul. So the game just sort of dragged on. You're like, just get this thing over with. I props to the Seton Hall ticket department. I also mentioned him on Twitter. Uh, the guy's not on Twitter necessarily. I don't think. But my guy in the ticket office, uh, I don't know if it was a product of the fact that there were very few people in the Cincinnati area who wanted to see the game. Probably not many people were coming out to Cincinnati for the game, but the ticket office hooked hooked me up with the seats right behind the bench. I don't know if that was for this game. I don't know if that was the moment you'd want to sit behind the bench because you're sort of like, and somebody had sent me screenshots of what it looked for I guess for the 20 people. I knew one of the 20 people who subscribed to Peacock for the game sent me screenshots of me sitting behind the bench. Just it's a it's a good experience to get that close to a game because I don't normally sit that close. But on the other hand, it's not the best experience when your team just basically all but no shows, which is what happened last Tuesday.
I'm kind of glad I didn't watch the game because Utica City FC they had a game at 3 o'clock. When Seton Hall, as you all know, tipped off at 2. So I really didn't get to watch. I couldn't watch any of it. I only like looked, kind of like just checked like periodically before We got our pregame, ceremonies and whatnot, pregame intros and all that good stuff. Like we normally start all that around like 2:40 before a 3:05 kickoff. But checking periodically, I saw Felton in the starting lineup. Like, oh, okay, so it's good to see that Shaw is trusting his freshman to be the starting point guard, and hitting that three early. I really thought, I'm like, okay, now this is a guy that he can start off, and he wasn't all that flustered or anything by being the starting point guard as a freshman in only the team's 14th game of the season. We're at that pretty much at the halfway point of the 31 game schedule, but Felton getting the start, really, really encouraged by that. And I thought he did well. My only gripe is I wish he got more time on the court. But I feel like that trust in more minutes is going to come over time. The more that he shows Shaheen Holloway and the staff, the more minutes he'll get. But I thought for his first career start, in the minutes that he was provided, I thought he did a pretty good job running the point and also putting the ball in the basket. Now, I mean, to go back to the negative, I mean, Xavier had 9 blocked shots. They blocked 9 shots. Jerome Hunter had 4 of them. And he's not all that big. He's 6'8", 6'9"-ish. And here he is blocking 4 shots. And he also went 2 for 2 from 3. And 3 for 3 overall from the floor. Conwell had a big day. They went 10 of 21 from behind the arc. Seton Hall shot it well from 3. They were 6 for 13, but inside the arc, they were just not good. I think they were like 18 of 48 from 2. That's 37.5% compared to shooting I think a 46% from 3. And that's just not going to cut it like against anybody. And it's funny how, Pat, you mentioned, previewing the Xavier game. You mentioned John Hughley, who you didn't really see as a non-factor. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of like the kid on Villanova, who Perkins, who went off for a big game after having a quiet start to the season. Of course, Hughley, the latest instance of a guy going off for his biggest game of the season against Seton Hall. Like another one's like, oh great, go figure things. But I mean, overall,
I guess the one thing to say about the Hughley wasn't the reason why Seton Hall lost.
well, yeah,
They were already way behind. By the time Hughley got a lot of his stuff going in the second half. By that time, he was just picking the bones off of the bird, so to speak, for the damage that guys like Conwell and Marcus Foster and I already mentioned Maddox. I mean, those guys already by shooting the 3 as well as they did, and Seton Hall didn't do as good a job contesting the 3 as you would like a team to do, and didn't make a concerted effort to force Xavier to go into the paint. Now, whether or not they would have, again, if Hughley is scoring the way he's scoring inside, certainly, McKnight, Swain, and some of the other guys on Xavier could have done more damage inside if the threes weren't already falling and they weren't getting threes at will. It wasn't like they didn't have open threes the whole game to work off of. So, it's just, again, this is the way Sean Miller envisions the Xavier offense. The ball doesn't stick. It moves around all the time, and somebody takes the first open shot that's available. Seton Hall, unfortunately, as they've had a bad habit of doing all season, they double at bad times, they overhelp, and the consequences that you just skip a pass out. If you try to double team somebody, somebody's going to be open. And unfortunately, the guy who was open for Xavier made Seton Hall pay more often than not, and that's why they took the beating that they took out in Xavier. If there's a bright spot, Seton Hall did lose there by 20 points with a team that won a lot more games last season. So there's the shame of it was that they were not competitive on Tuesday. That's the real shame of it. And one of the comments my wife and I had watching the game from behind the bench was that besides the Alden, who we all know, Gus is all in every night. It didn't seem like a lot of guys on Seton Hall looked particularly interested in being there on Tuesday, which is something unfortunately you have to monitor the rest of the season. As right now the question is, what are these guys playing for? You'd hope that you put on a uniform and all the other circumstances and you're going all out, but it's 2025 and sometimes agendas get skewed between, do I care if my team wins? Do I care about my stats? Unfortunately, then you get into conversations about which of these guys are trying to sort of impress somebody else. Are you sort of like, all right, if I put my points up, is that my ticket to get a good offer if I hit the portal in the spring and stuff like that? I mean, hopefully it's still too early to be thinking about that, but unfortunately, that's always going to be in the conversation. That's always going to be in the mindset, particularly for a team that, it looks like the things that Seton Hall is playing for right now is don't go 0-20 and then maybe get better when Big East tournament time comes up, where I guess in theory anything can happen in a conference tournament. So I think really it's not like right now you're like, all right, we have to beat DePaul and Providence and get ourselves positioned for some of the quad one opportunities. That's not going to matter for Seton Hall right now. The boat for the at-large bid has sailed months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned, the whole, like 0-20 thing and, biggest tournament, anything can happen. I mean, DePaul last year, they fired Stubblefield about halfway through the season, and under Coach Brady, they almost stunned Villanova in the Garden. I mean, I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I just thought that was the best possible segue to talking about DePaul, who most recently played Villanova on Saturday, and now they're staying on the East Coast and making the short drive, if you even want to call it that. It's a couple hours, which ain't bad. So from Philly up to New Jersey to take on Seton Hall Wednesday on Peacock at 6:30. I feel like if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure when the numbers came out, Seton Hall the most Peacock exclusive games of anyone in the conference. I think DePaul was probably tied with that or a close second, if anything. But so those teams are squaring off at the Rock Wednesday night. Both of these teams are winless in the league. DePaul's 0-4, Seton Hall's 0-3. But DePaul, at least for them, considering how bad they have been over the last, let's be real with each other, the last 20 years, how bad they've been, and especially last year, going 0-20 and then 3-29 overall. They at least have some upside, unfortunately. And it sucks that I'm saying this, but they at least have some upside because of how they looked. I mean, granted, they played a soft non-conference schedule, but they did beat Wichita State in mid-December, and they were competitive against Providence, which unfortunately that hasn't really aged well. Though Providence nearly went to Gamble and beat UConn their last time out. St. John's they really weren't competitive against. They played easily their worst game of the season against Nova, but they were competitive at Texas Tech early in the Big East Big 12 battle in the first week in December. And Chris Holtman, he's got his team at least trending in the right direction. What do you make of this matchup overall?
There's two key guys missing for DePaul, or potentially missing for DePaul on Wednesday night, and that could be the difference between whether Seton Hall leaves the Rock with their first Big East win or not. The first guy who I think is definitely out is David Skogman. He was their starting center during the non-conference play. 6'10" guy who doesn't really play like a traditional center does. He basically his game is going out the 23 feet and dropping 3-point bombs. And that could create a matchup problem, as we saw a little bit when Seton Hall played Villanova. a few weeks ago, and Seton Hall had to deal with Eric Dixon. Well, he's not in Eric Dixon's league, of course, but when he gets on, he played really well against Providence about a month ago, and gave Providence fits, and that's how DePaul went out to an 8-point lead with 3 minutes to go in that game. Unfortunately, they blew the 8-point lead and then got beaten overtime against Providence. So he's definitely out, I believe. The guy who's a question mark at this point, and I don't know if we'll know for sure until we get closer to the opening tip on Wednesday night, is their point guard Connor Enright. And Enright was tremendous in the non-conference schedule. Not that Enright's going to amaze you with his scoring ability, but Enright is maybe one of the best true point guards in the Big East. And I believe I believe he's still third or fourth in the league in assists, even though he's had to sit out, even though he didn't make the game on Saturday because he got injured a week ago or less than a week ago against Connecticut. They gave Connecticut a decent game most of the way on New Year's Day. Connecticut pulled away in the final minutes out in Chicago. But again, Chris Holtman's got this. At least Chris Holtman has the culture right. I think what he's missing are the talent levels not quite where the rest of the Big East is. And you can see that sort of as again, you saw it against St. John's. You saw that against Villanova. You didn't see it as much against Connecticut. And of course, the flip side is what's Seton Hall's talent level. Seton Hall's certainly not in the conversation talent-wise as the three teams I just mentioned. But on the flip side, DePaul doesn't. It's an interesting matchup because DePaul doesn't play defense, and Seton Hall doesn't really play offense. So if DePaul can manage to find a way to hit enough threes in the game, Seton Hall's going to have problems. Because I think that any team that shows any ability to score against us puts Seton Hall behind the 8 ball. Because then for example, Monmouth's a good example of a team like that because Monmouth showed the ability, particularly early in the second half of that game, to score whenever they wanted to. And unfortunately, Seton Hall's not in a good place when they're forced to show any type of offensive ability. So if DePaul can get its game going a little bit offensively on Wednesday night, then they could put Seton Hall in trouble in that game, particularly if they can get, let's say, a 10 or 12-point lead. On the flip side, if their offense doesn't run well without Enright, or if Enright's not 100%, they could struggle finding open shots. Now they have a lot of guys who can shoot the three. It's not just Skogman, obviously. You look that roster up and down. You got guys like Troy D'Amico, C.J. Gunn, Jacob Meyer, Isaiah Rivera. They have a lot of dangerous players on the offensive end. Any one of them, if they find a hot hand, you noted the Wichita State game that they played, I think about a month ago, where they just had all the cylinders clicking. You watched that was a well-oiled machine. That looked better than almost anything we've seen from the DePaul team in the last 5 years. So they have the potential to look really good, particularly in a game against a team like Seton Hall. The question is, without Enright and without Skogman, are they missing too many key pieces to help their offense work in an efficient manner? And nobody's going to know until the ball tips off Wednesday night.
So, yeah, my assessment of the matchup, it's going to be a matter of who wants it more. And given the 3 Ds of desire, dedication, and discipline, you would think that Seton Hall would want it more, but given the performance of the last few games, and just at various points throughout the season in games that they shouldn't have lost and games where they should have been a lot more competitive, like most recently, like at Xavier, where they should have been a lot more competitive. Um, you would think that would be Seton Hall, but unfortunately, just I'm questioning it because DePaul, they're a hungrier team. They haven't won a Big East game since in the regular season, not since January of 2023. And their last overall Big East win was against Seton Hall in the Big East tournament in 2023, which is just bonkers to me just to think about. Um, but anyways, Enright, I just looked it up. He is number one in the conference in assists right now at right around just under 7 per game. He's number 9 in the country. He's just slightly ahead of a host of guys. Hassan Diarra, Cam Jones, and Stephen Ashworth are just behind him among the top 15 in the country in assists per game. So, yeah, if they don't have his ability to facilitate the offense and get guys open and dropping dimes, yeah, that's going to put DePaul at a major disadvantage. I think with Seton Hall, however, you got to invoke something out of Okorafor and Dual. Okorafor only played 8 minutes against Xavier on New Year's Eve. Dual barely saw the court. He lost his starting spot to Felton. And I don't see any reason why Felton wouldn't continue to start unless Shaw has a really different idea and he's really just trying anything and everything, throwing anything at the wall and hoping something sticks. I mean, who knows? I wouldn't blame him for trying to just anything. But at this point, you got to play who's been playing the best. Felton has been playing really solid over the last, the Georgetown game and then the Xavier game. Felton played pretty well and I think has earned the starting point guard spot for now. He might have a bad game Wednesday night and maybe for Saturday at Providence, maybe you got to put Dual back in the line. Maybe you got to put Chauncey Jenkins back in the line. I mean, who knows? But it's going to be a one game at a time kind of thing.
I laughed at the notion of Garway Dual going to play at Providence on Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
On Saturday. It's one thing. I don't know if we mentioned this when we were doing previews earlier in the season, but it's sort of telling that Providence people have not been as upset about Dual leaving as Seton Hall people were about Richmond leaving for St. John's. And unfortunately, Dual has proven the Providence people right because, he's been injured, sure, but he's also sort of giving you reason. I forgot the conversations have been, how is Garway Dual a top 50 guy when he left high school? And then recently I rewatched some videos of Dual and he doesn't hit a lot of 3 points. You see, when you watch videos of players who are trying to impress you into recruiting them, they usually show a guy driving the lane. They'll show a guy dunking. They'll show a guy make a steal and make a steal and a slam dunk on the other end. And then they'll show a guy shooting a few threes. Okay, basically you want to prove that you've got a well-rounded game. You don't want to give people who you're trying to get to recruit you to have an excuse as to why you're not recruited. So a guy like Dual walks on the court and you see him and you're like, all right, now we know why he's had why he's had such interest by college people, because he's big, he's got the big wingspan that impresses everyone. There have been times this season where it looks like, particularly when he's been interested, he has frustrated opposing guards. See if Garway Dual was on, he'd give Jaden Pierre all the trouble in the world on Saturday night. And maybe he gets inspired trying to show Providence that, hey, you should have kept me here instead of the guys you brought in. I don't think any Providence people are talking about, well, if Garway Dual was on this team, we would have been Connecticut yesterday, or we wouldn't have lost that game to St. John's that they lost in the on the putback with the clock running out a few weeks ago. I don't think a lot of people in Providence are talking about we're in contention for an at-large bid if we have Garway Doolin here instead of Wesley Cardette or Cliff Floyd or whoever the guy. I forgot. I should have known what Floyd.
Yeah, Corey
Corey
Floyd.
Floyd. I watched the whole game yesterday, and I can't remember who. For some reason, Corey Floyd didn't stick in my mind. Jaden Pierre went nuts yesterday, and Jaden Pierre is proving. Pierre is a miss. Pierre is an enigma because Pierre has become a very good scoring guard. He might be the best 3-point shooter on Providence's team, if we're being honest. I'm sure if we look at percentages, maybe Abdul Rahim or Cardette is shooting better from three. But in terms of a guy who is taking more 3-point shots and the 3-point shots are being impactful, Pierre is the guy on Providence's team. The flip side is he's also playing the point guard. So he's got to not only do a lot of scoring, but he's also got to figure out the way to run the offense. And there are times to get to sort of looking at what could be an issue for Providence in that game on Saturday night. There are times when he gets careless with the ball. And the other issue, it didn't pop up as much yesterday, but it's popped up a lot during the season, is that, because Providence is basically playing a whole bunch of players who have never played with each other, between Ryan Mela, the Oswin, I forgot how to pronounce his last name. It's, we have Aaron A. They have Oswin. I'm gonna give
Erwin
you're the guy who's
Once? Erwin Once?
yeah,
Aaron
yeah.
Once. I think that's my guess.
All right. Well, between nobody on this team has played together, which is why, besides yesterday, their offense has usually looked out of sync. I mean, I didn't watch much of this game because I didn't have to, but I read enough about their game against Marquette New Year's Eve, and they were worse than we were. And they were at home on New Year's Eve and got waxed by one of the top 10 teams in the country in Marquette. But they beat themselves as opposed. Marquette did what Marquette did, but it didn't hurt that Providence couldn't handle the ball. Providence turned the ball over a lot, and that's been their problem the whole season. So if Seton Hall could put consistent pressure on Providence, they could possibly get enough turnovers which allow them to stay in this game and maybe steal one up in the amp on Saturday night. Plus, I don't think the students have come back at Providence yet. So, although they usually have a pretty good crowd, regardless of whether the students, again, the other issue is that now those guys have seen, the Providence fans saw that bad loss against St. John's when they were up by 16 in the first half, and they saw that bad loss where they were just beat from the jump on New Year's Eve. So, they're playing a Seton Hall team that's not really that they're playing a Seton Hall team no one really respects. So I don't know what type of impact the crowd will have on that game on Saturday night. And if Seton Hall maybe Wednesday night's game means a lot to get you some confidence and to get you some momentum, because maybe it's just a matter. It's like they talk about a jump shooter who's in a slump. If he can find a way to put one in the basket, it snowballs after that. So maybe you get this one win against DePaul, you get that monkey off your back. You're not going to go 0-20 in the Big East, and then you have some confidence going into a game against Providence on Saturday night, where maybe you feel, okay, we can turn Jaden Pierre over. We can keep the 3-point shooters from doing any damage. And it's not as if Providence has a big guy who necessarily scares you. Oswin has been getting better, he's been getting a little bit better every outing on the way, but he's still not nearly at the level of the elite big men in the Big East. And Seton Hall handled Thomas Sawyer of Georgetown relatively well a couple of weeks ago when Seton Hall almost stole one from Georgetown up at the Rock. So, again, it's hard to tell, and a lot of it again is going to depend on who wants it. I mean, Providence wanted that game yesterday, but I think part of that was that they're on national television. Uh, they hate Connecticut. It's just part of the guys who have been. They just wanted Connecticut's the one team that they want to beat. Uh, and if they had gotten a couple more breaks yesterday, they might have picked off Connecticut up at Gamble. And we know that they do certain things well. And if they don't turn the ball over, their offense is going to perform reasonably well. So I guess we'll have to see we'll have to see how Seton Hall and Providence both come out Saturday night, and then depending on who comes out better than the other, somebody in the bottom of the league is going to get another win. It might only be the difference between whether you're coming ninth or coming 10th or coming 11th, but that still kind of means something.
There was something about Providence that I wanted to point out. Now I'm trying to remember what the heck it was. So I was looking at like what I was, I became like bug-eyed. I was looking at how Providence against Marquette. The turnover differential in that game was 22-5. Providence 22 turnovers, Marquette just 5. That blew my mind. Like, you don't see that every day, especially in the Big East, because Providence. Well, they'd be much better if Bryce Hopkins was healthy. I mean, he looked in the 3 games that he played up until he got injured again. I mean, he was averaging 17 a game in 3 games. He looked okay in his first game back against BYU, but the other 2 games, I mean, he was simply superb. And you can tell like they're missing him. I mean, 1-3 in the Big East. They're right in that bottom 4, along with Seton Hall, DePaul, and Butler, who we're going to see the Bulldogs next week at Hinkle. But as for the Providence game, I mean, yeah, the AMP, it doesn't really seem as formidable / scary as it has in the past. I know we beat them last year there, but different circumstances, different team, obviously. And also didn't help that Bryce Hopkins tore his ACL in the second half of that game. But, I mean, I don't think we're going to win in the AMP. However, it's not out of the realm of possibility because it's not this, place that you're scared, quote unquote, to play in. Like, it's not like an intimidating / tough place to play in now. And when the team isn't doing as well, and obviously when, there's still winter break going on, student attendance isn't as light, it isn't as strong. Therefore, the lifeblood in the building isn't as strong. And I think that could play into Seton Hall's advantage. But I think overall, yeah, Jaden Pierre is the one guy you really got to worry about with Providence. I think for the Friars, the one guy who came in, and we saw him against the Pirates in the NIT at St. Joe's, Christ Sandoko, from France. He made his presence felt against the Pirates in that first round NIT game where the Hawks nearly went into Walsh Gym and stole one from the Pirates and ended their season. He's been really underwhelming. He hasn't played since December 20th. And I mean, this was probably the one guy that a lot of Providence fans, in terms of like bolstering the front court in the wake of Josh Oduro graduating, like people were really ranting and raving about Esondoko, but he's been a non-factor. And again, he hasn't played since December 20th. I probably should have read up if he's, injured or something's going on with him. I don't know, but that interior, the lack of a veteran interior presence could play into Seton Hall's advantage. But then again, we were probably saying the same thing against Xavier. Look what happened there. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between Seton Hall and Providence in the sense that both teams thought they were getting a lot of top end transfers coming in who were going to keep them in the middle of the pack and in contention for an NCAA tournament bid. And the guys at Providence, there's probably a lot of similar issues between guys like Cardette and guys like Abdul Rahim and some of the other guys who have transferred in from Providence sort of similar issues that you've seen a little bit from Jenkins, a little bit from Dool, a little bit from Middleton, the same type of principles going on there where, for whatever reason, either it's because Kim English hasn't worked the rotation properly, or either because those guys just haven't performed when they've been asked to perform during the season. And then you can explain why Providence is, uh, looking almost. I'm going to say they look almost as bad as we have during this season. Now, of course, the good news is that come Wednesday, maybe both teams come into that game on Saturday with one Big East win if we can find a way to knock off DePaul, even though both of our wins, uh, respectively, would be against DePaul. So, then the question, then you get a win like that. And, not only are you probably not going to come in last place in the Big East, but, if Seton Hall finds a way to win these two games, they're 2-3. Now, again, that's probably not going to mean. I don't think you can break into the top five and avoid Wednesday night going 2-3. But at least you sort of have the idea that you're going to salvage something out of this season. And one thing I think a lot of people are looking for is how do the guys who you think have a future with this team show up over the next few weeks? Jasheem Felton, we've touched upon. Isaiah Coleman, does Coleman continue to be the guy scoring wise? And how does he respond when he has a bad game? One thing we haven't seen over the past few weeks is Coleman have a really bad game. He played reasonably well against Xavier on Tuesday night. He played very well up against Georgetown up at the Rock. He even had a decent game out in Villanova uh, a couple of weeks ago. So how does Coleman respond to a bad game? What do you get from Gus Yalden and God's will Aaron A? Presumably they're going to start to get almost all the minutes on the inside for this team. And what you get from guys like that. So can Holloway build a foundation of guys who could maybe come back their second year at Seton Hall and really start to show you something? Is Felton the answer to who's going to play the point guard? Because he probably right now on the current roster has the most point guard skills. Because I think Zion Harmon was supposed to pick up some of that slack in the point guard position, and Zion Harmon is probably, he's at least MIA, and he might be, I'd be surprised if Zion Harmon saw the court in a Seton Hall uniform again. So Jasheem Felton might be the future at the point guard position. Then you get Coleman. Can Scotty Middleton break out of his funk a little bit and show you some more consistency? Another guy who played a few minutes against Xavier, who we hadn't seen a lot of lately, is David Tubeck. Tubeck didn't do much against Xavier, to be perfectly honest, but it's got to be one of those things where what are we going to get out of David Tubeck? Is he a guy who could be a rotation piece next season? And then do you have a solid foundation in the middle between Aaron A and Yalden, where each of them could play 15 to 20 minutes a game and give you something to look forward to next season? That's I think what you're sort of looking for, particularly since this. If you're not playing for an at-large bid, then maybe you shouldn't be emphasizing guys like Wusu. And I hate to say it because I like the way he's played sometimes. Chauncey Jenkins isn't coming back next year. It sucks if you're Jenkins because you came in this team of expectations that you were going to be a big, and maybe Holloway does play him a little more depending on how he's going. But you've got to look at guys who have a future with this team as opposed to some of the older guys who don't have a future with the team.
I kind of agree. I do agree with that, but it's a matter of like how much do you prioritize it at this stage because you still have 17 more regular season games to go. I think Shaw's in the right direction in terms of allotting the minutes that he's been giving to the guys that he feels like he wants to retain and build that foundation with for next season, like Felton, like Ari Aronay, and Yalden. And, maybe David Tubek gets some more minutes. Same with Scotty Middleton. Um, Yassine Toomey, though, we were talking about early in the season how the what he gives this team as a stretch for early in first couple of games. He had to play the 5, and he clearly didn't look comfortable in that. And then he moves to the stretch 4 with a core 4 back. Looked a lot better. And now all of a sudden, he's MIA too. Like, he barely saw the court against he's barely seen the court for the past few weeks.
He wasn't even in Cincinnati, I don't think.
That's right.
I don't think he even showed up for the. I don't know if it's because he was. I didn't find out, and frankly, Toomey is. I don't know what Toomey has just lost. I think he's lost interest, and it's a shame because what you saw very early in the season was a guy who looked like he had all of the tools offensively to give you something on this team. Unfortunately, I think unfortunately he's fallen into a funk that a few other guys on this team, such as Duel, such as a core 4, have fallen into, which is like, you know what, I'm getting pulled out of the game. That's part of one of the other issues here is that Holloway has pulled guys off without a lot of explanation. Even Tuesday, when he takes Felton out of the game after a few bad possessions, I think a lot of people had hoped, but a lot of people had wished that Holloway would have let Felton work through the problems he was having. And they were defensive problems. Really what happened was he was losing McKnight or he was losing Conwell, and Xavier made him pay, which, hey, that's fine. That's but I mean, maybe that's something where you just have to teach a freshman a lesson and let him play through it instead of like, all right, you know what, yank him out. He doesn't see the court again until the second half. And it's like, hey, this guy hit a basket early in the game. It looks like he's played reasonably well. So that's another thing I think look, when you're losing, people question everything. Honestly. I think that's the reality of it, which is that no move looks like a good move when you're losing. So if Holloway's trying to, maybe throw Felton in as a start to, give him an opportunity, and then he pulls him away because he's trying to teach him, like maybe he's trying to bring him back to the bench and say, here are the mistakes you're making on defense, so that when I put you back in, you can correct those mistakes. But people look at it as, all right, it's not only his fault, and it wasn't only his fault that Xavier ran off the 16 points in a row. That's not his. People like Wusu and people like Jenkins and people like Middleton and Duel, everyone had fault as to why Xavier couldn't be stopped Tuesday afternoon. So that's just sort of the thing. I mean, I understood it myself. I saw he was getting lost defensively, and you at that point you hopefully bringing him out to show him things. Hopefully the assistant coaches are or he's going back into the locker room at halftime and watching some film about mistakes he was making defensively, because he's a freshman. You can't have an expectation that a freshman's going to know what the tendency are of experienced players. So, that's what Holloway's got to let some of these guys work through it. And, there's going to be a transitional period over the next few weeks where, again, particularly this week, where Holloway wants to leave this week with at least a win so that he doesn't go 0-20, because he's got two of the more winnable games come up this week. So, he's going to go all out to try and get at least one, if not two wins this week. See what happens. You mentioned the game at Butler, and Butler is struggling right now. The game I was at Butler, their loss to Villanova was horrible. Yeah. I don't have a rooting interest in that game, but I will tell you that I felt I've never left a building feeling worse about the outcome of a game as I did watching Butler just collapse in the last 5 minutes against Villanova on New Year's Day. And then they play that really they could have picked St. John's off on Saturday afternoon, and they just for whatever reason forgot how to score a basket in stretches of that game. Where if they had found if they had found their rhythm, they might. Butler right now could be sitting at. Some might think Butler should be sitting right now at least 2-2. And they're more talented than being an 0-4. I guess the point I lost. I went into a tangent about how just the Big East works and how you want to get the next three games in particular are very winnable heading into that St. John's game a week from Saturday night, which hopefully even though only a couple of those guys on this, only three guys are left from last year's team. Hopefully, the message is imparted about the importance of that game next Saturday night up at the Rock. Hopefully, no one's not giving a half effort in that game, at least on Seton Hall's side.
So, as I looked more on the box score from the Xavier game, and of course, it's a James Breeding disaster class. The fact that there were 51 fouls. You think the Georgetown game was bad? Xavier was even worse. 51 fouls, 64 free throws. There's no way in hell that a team should be allowed, unless teams are legit playing like they're the 80s Detroit Pistons. There's no way a team should be shooting on average one free throw per minute of the game. 40 free throws in a whole game for one team, unless that one little circumstance. No, that is just.
Let me ask you a question about that. And I know we're going on a little bit here. Let me ask you a question. I've seen rumors that at least college referees get rated on how many times they don't miss a call. So that because Breeding makes all these calls, according to the way referees get judged, he's getting credit because he's making all the calls, even though it's making the game unwatchable. Does that make any sense?
It actually does. And let me explain things from, my personal experience being, a referee myself. So we are told, especially with the level that I referee at with girls basketball, if you're calling every little thing, you're going to be there all night. Like, because the amount of travels and just incidental fouls, like if you called all of that again, like if the game tips off at 5:30, you're going to be there for like till at least 7. Like if you forget about the varsity being starting at 7 o'clock, you are not even going to come close to that because you're going to be there all night if you call every little thing and nitpicking, which I feel like in this case, James Breeding kind of does. Like you want to give all these teams a little bit of leeway and freedom to still play the game loosely. Like if you're calling like a teeny tiny little like hot stove touch, like by rule, yes. However, like if you really think about it, like these teams, like they're not going to see it as a foul that they're going to keep calling over and over and over again unless your name is James Breeding. I don't know if he has the philosophy that like he's going to get paid by the whistle. If he blows his whistle more than anyone else, the more money he's going to bring in. Because clearly that's not how it works. But yeah, referees do get evaluated, and at least from my experience, I still need one more year doing girls basketball because I did 5 on the boys board before switching to girls basketball. But referees, they do get evaluated by rating committees on their respective boards. Like they evaluate you, watch you do your game, and they rate you on a lot of things. Your mechanics, your ability to work as a team with whoever you're officiating with, your communication skills, your knowledge of, and your implementation of the rules as an official and like adhering to them and calling the game as written in the rules. Yes, all of that is in there. All of it gets factored in. But one big factor that a lot of people don't really think about, but should be taken a lot more into consideration, game management. And that's what, at the JV level, at least from what I've experienced, the biggest aspect of that is game management because you don't want the game to drag out there all night. So you do your best you can to manage, call the obvious, especially with fouls and the little stuff like travels, so that the game can have a flow to it. If the game has no flow, it's boring and it sucks the life out of you. And I feel like that's what happens every time I see James Breeding ref a game. He might have a strong knowledge of the rules and will call the game as by the book really well, but his management of it, his game management, is abhorrently bad. So that's where I'll leave it at, James Breeding, before my face starts to get as red as this hat.
I just thought about one thing. You mentioned the fact that you're calling personally, and this is probably something. Obviously, he was the hot topic yesterday because he's calling that Connecticut Providence game.
Oh yeah,
and the first thing anybody has talked, the second thing after they talked about how Connecticut came back was how awful it was to watch James Breeding, both sides. You had Providence fans who were pissed off about why is Connecticut getting 25 fouls called for them in the second half of that game, and did the foul shooting let Connecticut get back into the game? And the flip side is that you've got Connecticut fans who are like, could we just go 5 minutes without Breeding calling something the other way? But I do, but one thing I'm thinking about is that you're talking about I have to get the JV game done because there's a varsity game taking place. The JV starts at 5:30, the varsity starts at 7, and God forbid I blow a whistle and that varsity game starts at 7:30 and not 7. So then college basketball games are supposed to be done in 2 hours. The Fox doubleheaders, for example, usually have a 6:30 game and an 8:30 game. And ideally, you'd like to have the 8:30 game start as close to 8:30 as possible. And what happens routinely is that if you have a James Breeding, or you have a Brian O'Connell, or you have some of the other referees in the Big East who tend to blow a lot of whistles in these games, it causes the 8:30 game to leak to 8:45. And then that frustrates fans who are waiting for the 8:30 game, particularly the ones in the arenas, and particularly if you're doing a game on the East Coast, that 8:30, 8:45 game is not going to end until 11 o'clock. And people don't stay up to watch the end of it. People will leave the arena early because they have to get home to get from work. That they're expecting a game to end at 10:30 that's not going to end till 11 or even after 11 o'clock. And that causes its own set of issues. So maybe it's something where the Big East has to go to Breeding and say, hey, look, your games aren't ending in a 2-hour window. Do something about it. And that's not the way you think, but that might not be a bad way to accommodate that and have somebody in the Big East office tell guys like Breeding, the game should end in 2 hours. So if you're thinking, it's one thing to want to impress the people who are judging you, that how to call a blocking foul, or you know how to call a guy getting slapped on the wrist when he's dribbling down the court. But it's another thing when your game's going 2.5 hours for no good reason. And Tuesday's game went way too long for no good reason. The game started at 2 o'clock. I think it was a 2 o'clock start. Get the game over at 4 o'clock. Particularly since it's not competitive. Xavier's had this thing decided 3 minutes into the second half. Referee as if you're using basically a running clock. Unless there's unless there's something obvious. If a guy gets knocked down going for a layup, and you have to call that, but you don't have to call a touch foul if somebody's trying to get into the passing lane and get a steal. You don't have to call that. You don't have to call that all the time. So I think you hit upon maybe an answer to the James. And I don't know, this has little to do with Seton Hall at this point, but on the other hand, it's something that affects it. It's just like, and Breeding is going to call more Seton Hall games, so that's just something to keep in mind. If one thing, maybe we're not going to get Seton Hall any more wins this season, or we're not going to get them to the NCAA tournament. But if enough people are talking about Breeding, hopefully we'll finally get somebody in the office in New York to think twice about hiring him every time they have the opportunity.
And the thing is with Breeding, I mean, again, game management, and from what I read, there was like, I forgot, there was like an article from The Athletic where anonymous coaches talked about officials. And regarding James Breeding, one coach said that he was, quote, extremely difficult to not confront, but like he was unapproachable. Like, he would, if you were to ask him about why he called it, like he just wouldn't answer you. Like, and as officials, we tell coaches and players we'll answer questions, not statements. So if a coach can respectfully ask, like James, why did you call it that way? Why'd you make this call? Like, if I'm him, if I'm being asked that, I'll answer a question. I'll answer your question. I'm not going to answer like it should have been travel. It should have been like ask why was that a travel or whatever the case may be. And apparently, from what this article said, James Breeding is really unapproachable, and he kind of believes that like I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm not even going to like listen to you even question it, even ask why I called it. I don't owe you an explanation. Like, no, like clearly your calls have an effect on the outcome of a game, whether it's a 1-point game or a 30-point game. Your calls will ultimately alter the outcome of that game. I mean, I hate the notion like one call can just decide a game, win or lose for one side. Like, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of that, but I do see some logic in that. But how you blow the whistle can affect how a game goes. Like getting disgruntled fans, players, and coaches when you're blowing the whistle for no reason at all, blowing it unnecessarily. I think that's a better way of putting it. But on the but also in that same vein, not letting things get out of hand either. So I feel like he definitely doesn't let things get too out of hand. However, we saw in 2019 in the Big East semifinals between Seton Hall and Marquette, he did let things get way out of control. So even if he does have that kind of control freak habit like he does on the game, he still lets it get out of the hand because he is god awful at game management. If I never see him ref another Big Seton Hall game again, I'll be happy. But we all know it's inevitable. So I'm just
Wednesday night.
If that happens Wednesday night, you know what? Thank God my new pickleball league I'm in starts Wednesday. So if he's reffing that game, the less I got to see of him, the better. I'm not like this is. I'm not even gonna make this about like Seton Hall being Seton Hall right now. If I don't have to watch James Breeding ref, I will gladly take that. I have honestly, I'll play pickleball all day if it means I don't have to watch James Breeding ref for 2 hours, which ends up being 2.5.
So we've turned this into we can spin this episode as, if you're pissed off you saw James Breeding do a bad game on Sunday, here's where we make you feel better about what you saw.
Yeah, this is the this is like the James Breeding. I'm trying to like this is the like if you've been affected, it's kind of like if you've been affected by mesothelioma, you may be entitled to compensation. If you've been affected by James Breeding, you may be entitled to compensation. Like join our support group today, everyone.
I have to tell all Providence and Connecticut people who couldn't get through the end of that game. They because you get the. I posted the meme about the two guys holding the two guys who hate each other.
Oh yeah, the Bloods and the Crips. Oh yeah,
they lock arms because no, not that one. That's the black arm and the white.
Like where they're dabbing each other
up. Black arm and the white arm grab each other and they agree they hate each other, but they agree that they hate something else worse than. So that was yesterday.
Yeah. Okay, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah, that was yesterday. So And it was people on both sides. There were articles written. My guy BOC, uh, who does the Providence Crier, wrote a whole article about how bad breeding was today. So that's just again, it's on national television. There's more people watching a game on NBC than are watching a game on Peacock or on CBS Sports Network or wherever else you're watching a Big East game. So the whole country's watching this game and watching the disaster area that's James breeding. So,
So,
I know we sort of tangented into it, but hope maybe we'll get something out of this. So,
we definitely will. James breeding slander will always be welcomed and honestly encouraged. So the last thing before we sign off, Pat, I definitely want to ask you, what were your review of the Cintas Center, and then of course, checking out a basketball cathedral like Hinkle Fieldhouse the next day.
Cintas is a nice building. Definitely the one thing that both of these Xavier and Butler have that we don't is an on-campus facility of a decent size that's just dedicated to uh, Seton Hall. I do think that means it's not our fault because obviously those two campuses are built a lot later than Seton Hall's campus was built. So, and getting the land that you need to get to put a 8 or 10,000 seat building on or near Seton Hall's campus is impossible. So you're dealing. I mean, Providence doesn't have a big building on its campus either, nor does DePaul. So they have an advantage. I mean, Cintas is a nice building. Obviously they didn't have students, so that changed the dynamic, and it wasn't a good game. But I think that for purposes of it, Cintas is something. I mean, I think the thing that really makes Xavier is Dana Gardens, which is a 10-minute walk from Cintas. We hit that. Shout out to BJ, Mike, and the crew at Dana Gardens. Maybe the best pre-game atmosphere that I've seen in the Big East. It's Dana Gardens is a shrine to Xavier basketball. You have old jerseys hanging in the ceiling, so they do a great job. And of course, all the Xavier fans show up before the game. They have a nice bar within walking distance of Hinkle as well, but it doesn't quite have the same atmosphere. Hinkle is if you haven't been, you definitely have to get to Hinkle Fieldhouse. Find a way to get yourself to Indianapolis. Save your money, whatever it takes. Take a day off or two if you need to. Get yourself to Hinkle Pavilion. If Hinkle Fieldhouse has to be on the bucket list of every college basketball fan. First of all, you can walk. We walked. We got there. They let you there early enough where you can walk up and pet Butler Blue on the head, assuming he's in the building. My wife did that, said it was the best experience she has ever had at a basketball game, any basketball game. Shout out to Evan, who is Butler Blue, the fourth handler. Really nice guy. I think it's Evan Strauss. Really nice guy, top of the line. Everything in Hinkle is just the Butler band is probably the best in the Big East. They just people just get attached to it. And look, I mean, it's very Butler centric. On the other hand, it's definitely a Big East level atmosphere. It's an atmosphere that could fit in any conference in the country. To be perfectly honest, they could be a Big Ten team, they could be an ACC team, or they could be a Horizon League team or an Atlantic 10 team. Just the atmosphere, the dedication the fans have. Their season's not going particularly well, as we've noted earlier in this episode, but that didn't keep almost every seat in that building on a night when they're out of school as well. Every seat was filled. They had a decent student section. They were into that game. Of course, they took a big lead on Villanova. They should have held on to, but that's a different Butler. I'm sure there have been Butler podcasts that have talked about that in the last week. So go to the Butler basketball podcast and talk and listen for that one. There's a really good one, by the way. But the point is, Hinkle is everything you expect it to be and more. So if you're thinking about going to Hinkle, don't think about it. Just do it. Find the airline tickets, find the hotel, and get your way out to Indianapolis to see Hinkle at some point.
It's definitely a bucket list item for me. I mean, I want to see every Big East basketball arena, but Hinkle's at the top of the list. I mean, I don't call it a basketball cathedral for nothing, and I know the mass majority of college basketball fans will agree with me. So what I want to end with, last but not least, shout out to the women's team. I got to shout them out. Speaking of New Year's Day, what a win for them, winning at the buzzer at Nova with Faith Massonis making that circus shot, and then they followed that up by winning in overtime against a Georgetown team that, Georgetown's a good, solid ball club. I mean, this is the same team that went to the Big East Championship game last year, and at Walsh on Saturday, the Pirates rallied and won in overtime. So they're 4-0 in the Big East at this point in the year. It's remarkable. So I think in the future, I think Pat and I
first time ever that they're 4-0 in the Big East.
Oh yeah, that's
which is shocking to think that. And they really, they big game coming up Saturday against Creighton at Walsh. Creighton's not ranked this year, but Creighton's still as good, if not better. Creighton's as good as they've been in that run with that Jim Flannery team. And if Seton Hall, if Seton Hall takes a big step towards getting an at-large bid, which you're going to need to get an at-large bid in the Big East on the women's side, because Connecticut's going to win the Big East tournament. It's at Mohegan Sun. Forget about it. But to get an at-large bid, Saturday could be the most important game in the schedule because you're playing Creighton, who is almost has their at-large bid locked in at this point. And on the women's side, they're very high in the net rankings. So this is a big win. If anybody listens who is thinking about, hopefully we don't get a snowstorm in New Jersey on Saturday. But if the weather's all right and you have the ability, get yourself to Walsh on. I can't because I have a family commitment if the weather holds up, but I have plans on getting to Walsh very soon in the near future to catch out Tony Vizella, Jay Needs, Faith Mazonis, and all of the Pirates who are kicking butt and taking names at this point.
And we both agreed. We definitely want. This is essentially like we're putting out the bat signal almost. To get Coach B, Faith, and any other player. We want to give them the proper spotlight, especially because even I can't believe they were co-Big East champions my freshman year in 2015. With Tabitha Richardson Smith, Dacia Simmons, and Khadidra Simmons. This crazy thing. This is the first 4-0 Big East team that Seton Hall has ever had. Again, it's shocking. So a bat signals out. For Coach B and Faith Massonis and any or all of his players to join us here for any time for a bonus episode of Hoist the Colors. But that's gonna do it for this week's edition. You might want to be on the keep your radar out because we got a big guest coming up next week. So we don't want to spoil it, but it's going to come out of left field. And when you find out who it is, you'll understand why. Because it's not really from the basketball realm, but he knows the Garden State really well because he spent nearly a decade of his professional career in his sport playing in the state of New Jersey, right near where Seton Hall played back in the 80s and the 90s at the same time that he was playing at the professional level of his sport. So that's the teaser. That's going to do it. For Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. Thanks for tuning into this week's edition of Hoist the Colors. And as always, onward to Tonia.